Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's been a while. We need to make an effort to get more guests in, I guess. But life is busy at my end. But anyway, we've got another guest. Before we get to him, I want to say hi to my lovely co-host Lilith. Lilith, how's it going? Yes, doing doing a new show. Doing a new show. Yeah. So, but that's a great show. I mean, yeah. And once it's in the startup period, so it's probably where yes, in 3 episodes. So yeah, so this is going to be a long running series. But so
Just
okay,
checking the chat now, and they're
checking
saying that I'm muted. Can you guys hear me now?
it that would be a sin and a blasphemy to mute Lilith. So we're not going to do
Yes,
that.
we would be smited from below?
Okay, so
Probably
yeah,
below.
so what people missed is that Lilith is part of the new series that Arn Ra's doing, Blasphemer's Bible, where he has um, atheists, a lot of them former believers, reading the Bible. But
We're
that's
trying to get a
not,
blend. There's some
yeah,
scholars and
yeah,
former believers, and get a blend of perspectives.
hmm,
There's more than one way to take it.
yeah.
So,
Okay, but that's not what we're here for today. Today we've got a guest, someone that I had a brief chat with on Twitter, and I tend to invite people that I think are um, would be good to have a conversation with, and because there are more people who want to come on our show, but we're not actually interested in having a dumpster fire. So I'm at the moment I'm a pretty selective when it comes to picking our guests. Um, I've spoken to him before, obviously, because we always do an intake. So, what do we call you? Do we call you Sheepdog Apologetics, or what would you prefer? By the way, welcome to the show.
Yeah, you can just call me Dave. That's my name. That's just the Sheepdog Apologetics is just the name I came up for when I started writing a blog. So just Dave. That'll
Okay,
be the easiest. That's what I remember.
welcome, Dave. So, if you want, can you do a small introduction and tell us who you are and
Sure,
what you? Yeah. Okay.
sure. Yeah, just I just wrote down a few things here because I this is really not my forte being on video or anything. So, my background, like we were talking about before the show started, there, I'm a retired Air Force officer. Spent 20 years in the Air Force, retired in 2010. I flew those 20 years. After I retired, I became a contractor, a defense contractor. I was one of the lucky ones. I got to go basically across the street and keep doing what I'd been doing for the previous 20 years, training air crew. Um, Been married for 21 years now. Got 2 kids. Um, as far as the religious side of it, I became a Christian in 1976 when I was 11. Um, Kind of the typical story there. Through college, kind of went off and did my own thing, and through the early years in the Air Force, and then just felt the pull to come back to Christ. Um, Started about 6, maybe 7 years ago studying apologetics because I heard a statistic that troubled me that about 75% of kids leave the church after they leave the home. And a lot of those don't ever return. So, with 2 kids, looking at their high school years and then on into college, realized there was a lot of questions I couldn't answer. So I started really looking into those questions to really be prepared to answer those if my girls ever came to me with those questions. And then about a year and a half, so I've been teaching apologetics at our church for about 4 years now. And then about a year and a half ago, started the website with just doing a blog, just writing about some of the things that I'd studied, just kind of trying to. Really, the goal was just to kind of condense it down into some easily manageable bits that people could read through, just to give them some ideas of the basic information that was out there.
Okay. So,
Well, I can always appreciate a man who explores ideas. I think that's really important. So, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Peter. Please go ahead.
yeah. So, what we usually start off with is what do you believe, and more important, why do you believe it? So obviously, from what you're saying and mentioning the statistics, we can deduct that you are a Christian. But if you can, is there any special denomination? And then we would like to get to the more important question: why do you believe what you believe?
Right. Well, as far as denomination, I do have a denomination that I follow, but with the website and everything, I try to keep it just to, as C.S. Lewis said, mere Christianity. I don't really get into a lot of the denominational discussions, or at least I haven't yet. Maybe at some point I will. As far as what I believe, I guess right up front in short terms, it's the deity, death, and resurrection of Jesus. I believe that we live in an imperfect world, that things aren't the way they should be, and everybody has a sense that that's true. It's not the way it should be for some reason. I believe that the things that we do, the things that we've done, will separate us from God and create a barrier between a relationship with us and God. I believe that there's nothing that we can do on our own that can fix that separation. That the only way to fix that is through the plan that God had created, which was the sacrificial atonement of Jesus on the cross, the perfect sacrifice. And then I guess to kind of sum it up, the bad news for some, the good news for others is there are those that will accept the gift and the sacrifice, and they'll be saved at the end times, and then there are those that won't.
So, to clarify, you do actually believe in hell?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And we should probably start at the beginning. What convinced you that Christianity is actually true?
Really, it was, and I know for someone like yourself that is looking for some sort of a tangible evidence, this is not going to mean a whole lot, but the day that I made the decision, I just felt this overwhelming sense that what I was doing was wrong. The way
Mm-hmm.
even as an 11-year-old, you still understand right and wrong. But I just had this sense that what I was doing wrong, and I just remember having this sudden realization of the sacrifice that had been made for me, even though I didn't deserve it.
Well, now I can understand that emotional moment actually very well. I was a believer, a very devout believer for 30 years.
Hmm.
One of the lines in some apologetics arguments, I don't necessarily say in yours, is that a former believer was never a true believer because of the perseverance of the saints, and that's rooted in, we won't get into Calvinism, that's a dumpster fire. But
Yes.
interestingly enough, that argument is never, ever, ever, ever made by any person who knew me while I was a believer, because it's too silly. So I do actually understand the emotional appeal of that. My concern is more that, while I understand the power of that impetus, how do you consider then that an emotional response like that, have you considered, alternative explanations, ways to distinguish that feeling from other feelings that might lead someone to a different belief system? Basically, by what method do you judge that your interpretation of your experience is the most accurate one? I don't doubt your experience. I'm not questioning that at all. I'm sure it's very sincere. I presume. It's more, what made you think that, have you considered that if you had been trained in a different way, you might have interpreted that experience differently? And what makes you think this is the best interpretation in terms of accuracy?
Really, it was not something. I mean, I'd gone to church since I was a little kid.
Oh, me too.
But it was not really something that I was looking to do as far as make that decision. Wasn't anything that I was like, oh, I just can't wait until I do this. But the sense that I had, again, I've heard a few of the guests on your shows talk about it, that it's just this sense that there is something there telling that you've got to do this. And I fought it. I fought it hard. As a somewhat introvert little 11-year-old kid, the last thing I wanted to do was go in front of the church. And I remember
altar calls.
Distinctly. I remember distinctly just this internal battle of saying, no, I'm not going to do this. But then this sense that, no, I have to do this. I have to make this public profession that this is a gift that was given to me, and that there's no, how much does an 11-year-old know and understand, but there was just this overwhelming sense that I had to do this. I had to accept that, what the Bible said as far as, sin separating us from God, and then going through the New Testament with the gift that Jesus provided. It just suddenly became upfront that I just had to do it. I had to finally give in. And it was a fight. It was a struggle.
If I can interrupt, and this is the part that I don't understand, it's also the reason why I have co-hosts like Lilith who have been believers before they decided to walk away. I never was brought up in any kind of religion. So my country now, not saying back then, but now is 80% plus people identifying as either atheist or non-believers. So what I get from your story is that you were raised in the church. You were already going to church. So you were already being told about the Bible. You were being told about God, being told about Jesus' sacrifice as it is described in the Bible. What I don't see is that you actually, when you had your experience, that you actually looked for where that experience came from, because you mentioned that you have an innate feeling of right and wrong, and I had that too. But it's also a thing that is partially taught to you when you are growing up. You're told by your parents, you can't do this, you can't do that. So part of that is through a learning experience, which is why different people think that different things are right and wrong. But have you ever sat down for yourself and thought, okay, now I was taught this idea from a very young age, is it actually correct? Does it line up with the truth?
Yeah, I mean, maybe not so much as a kid, but again, as I started looking into the apologetic side of it, and really investigating what the claims were, what the counterclaims were, and looking at those, really all it did was solidify what I had already, in an experiential way, had believed. But now looking at the different evidences, it has just increased my belief that what I believe, fortunately as a little kid, I wouldn't have understood, half the stuff that I've read over the past several years. But yeah, it's just gotten stronger. Now I know all of the evidences that are out there that actually point to, and again, I was going to do this earlier, but I think we can all agree, none of us, myself included, can with 100% certainty prove any of this. Atheists can't 100% prove their side. Christians can't 100% prove their side. So what we have to do is we have to look at the evidence and come up with the most probable likely answer.
I would say that the idea of 100% proof is a bit of a red herring. Because it's something I find children are quite fond of, as we always love to, are you sure? And
Right.
they want absolute certainty. But in adult life, I find the only people who insist on that are usually con men, either selling
Right,
you
and that's what I'm
100%
saying.
certainty for, hair oil or a car that's probably terrible, or possibly a religious or cult belief. But we do understand that that does not mean that all options are equally probable.
That's true.
There are certain things that are functionally impossible. We understand enough of biology, for example, to know that Bigfoot is not real. I mean, you know, what we would have to, everything we understand about biology would have to be somehow fundamentally flawed, and an entire thing would have to be different. And like the sheer number of things that would have to be incorrect that we have very reliable information about for that to be correct
Hmm.
is well beyond the point of absurdity. And we can call that certainty beyond a reasonable doubt. Maybe, is some sort of alternate reality scenario we could cook up. But in reality, I think you're not a Bigfoot enthusiast, right? I didn't.
No.
Okay. Yeah. And I try and use examples like that we're all, just to establish the principles that we're reasoning on, not on the basis
Right.
of making a direct comparison between that belief and any other.
Right. And
So then,
using your Bigfoot analogy, is it possible that there's a Bigfoot? Yeah, anything's possible. Is it probable? No, not really. We've got enough evidence to show that it's probably not a real thing, right? But again, we go back to what I said, that 100% certainty. We don't know with 100% certainty, especially when we start looking back at history. We have to rely on the evidences that are given to us through eyewitnesses, through even science, looking at what the probable explanation of things is. And
now,
that's what
when
we
you
have to
say,
examine.
because you did say earlier, which I applaud, that you looked at counter arguments to apologetics. Could you give me an example of something like that you've looked at, and perhaps how you saw a counter argument to some apologetic point? Just pick your favorite.
Well, since Peter mentioned it, I do believe, and I believe there's enough philosophical evidence out there to prove that, or to show that, in all likelihood, what I think Peter was talking about is epistemology as opposed to ontology. How you know things as opposed to why a thing is. In this case, whether something is right or wrong. I think we can all agree that torturing babies for fun is wrong. We don't have to be really told to do that, or not do that.
Not to do that, yes.
Right.
Ideally.
So so that is a ontological right or wrong. We don't have to be taught that that is necessarily wrong. Pretty much across the board, we can mostly agree that that is. And maybe cut you off here a little bit on your rebuttal. If we look at, well, there are some cultures that do this. Well, in most of those cultures, if not all, when you look at whether it's, you know, not torturing children, but the example that's brought up is the headhunters in Southwest Pacific, on some of the remote islands. If you look at those cultures, one of the interesting things that happens is they actually dehumanize the individual before they actually will partake in, human eating of human flesh.
Dehumanizing people before brutalizing them is pretty standard in all human cultures and in all of history and in all of time.
Right.
I would argue that is because human morality is based in empathy. It is based in the basic premise of justice being that a thing is not more or less unjust if done to another person than it would be if done to me. People cite the golden rule. Long before Jesus is said to have said that, Confucius said, "Do not do to another that which would be abhorrent if done to yourself." The principle is there, and it's based in our human capacity for empathy. Sharks, for example, do not have that. They are cold, dead-eyed things that do not have the capacity to understand the suffering of another in the same way. Other animals do, possibly to a lesser degree than ourselves. We're extrapolating a little because I cannot sit down with my cat and argue Kant and discuss, but but they do display empathy and so forth. I'm hard pressed to find an example of agreed upon moral code that is not based in empathy. Now, obviously, the mores of a specific culture, how much clothing you're supposed to wear if you're a Victorian era lady as opposed to now, that kind of thing, that is not, an agreed upon moral standard. That's a cultural norm, and that I'm distinctly, separating that from what we're talking about, I would hope, which is something that we could objectively discuss as being right or wrong. But I don't find that as being entirely dependent on my own internal sense, because there are ways to measure if I hurt someone and what the consequences of that would be. Not perfectly, of course, but, there are limitations to how much you can extrapolate there, but it is something I can measure in some sense. If I were to punch you, you would get a bruise. That's a thing that's bad,
But that leads me back then to the question of ontology and epistemology. Why is that bad? Why is empathy good?
What do you think bad means?
Exactly. It is.
No, I mean,
a lack
literally
of
the
good.
definition of the word. Can you define it for me?
It is a lack of good.
Okay, and then what
just
do you
like
think good means?
When you look at evil, evil in and of itself is not really a thing. It's a deprivation of something. Just as
I would
as
argue
cold
that's
as
questionable.
as
But if you want, I know the analogy you're going into here. I'm just going to head you off because I do want to get back to then what do you think good is by definition?
well, you're not going to like the answer, but good is an objective moral standard that is based outside of ourselves, outside of society.
Again,
And there's only one.
that's just restating. That's not actually giving us anything clear that we could measure it by. If I talk about harm, that's something we can measure.
If I may jump in, so you say it's outside of ourselves. So where does the definition of good come from?
Well, if you look at for a standard, it has to be an objective standard, because otherwise, things can change, and what is today good can tomorrow be bad.
What do you mean by objective then?
And unchanging.
Well,
and it
so
has to be not subjective, so it has to be outside of ourselves. It can't be just an opinion.
can I name
It
one
has to be-
thing? Can I name one thing that goes exactly against what you just said? Slavery. At some point, slavery wasn't considered to be a bad thing until we finally grew up and learned that we were literally harming other people. And then slavery was outlawed, and today it is seen as a bad thing. So I don't think that you have an unchanging moral standard, because if that were the case, then slavery would today be as good as it was back in let's say the days of the transatlantic slave trade, or back in the days when the Bible was written, because the Bible also mentions slavery.
It does. So let me ask you this.
Quite positively.
Was there ever a point in time, not opinion, not how society dealt with it, was there ever a point in time when slavery as an idea was good?
No.
Morally, objectively good?
No, not ever. Not ever.
I agree. So why, you're using the example of, antebellum South, you're using the example of in the Old Testament slavery. It was bad.
Mm-hmm.
It was objectively bad because it was a dehumanizing of another human being.
It was, but according to the God of the Bible, it wasn't. According to the God of the Bible,
exactly.
he laid down the rules for slavery. He told you what you could do and could not do with a slave. He told you that
and you could beat a slave to death as long as he didn't die the same day. I know.
Yes. Hold on. I want to finish my point. So he made the distinction that you could not enslave your fellow Hebrew, but also put in a loophole so you could. To me,
what loophole is that?
That is when the master gives his slave a wife, and he has children with his wife.
If a man comes in by himself, he will go out by himself. Yeah. If he will work for you 6 years, and in the 7th will go free without pay. If he comes in by himself, he will go out by himself. If he has a wife and children when he arrives, his wife and children will go out with him. If his master have given him a wife and children, they shall be his master's property and shall not go out with him. If the man shall say, but I love my wife and children and my master, and do not wish to leave them, then he shall take him to the men of the city, and then he shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall be his slave for life. The loving arms of children and the tears of babes made a lifetime slaves of men.
Okay, so what exactly verses were you quoting?
Leviticus. Let me see. Oh, was it Leviticus or Deuteronomy? Actually, that's one of those times when there's a contrast between the slavery laws, because women could go free in Deuteronomy, but not Leviticus, but that was a separate thing. It had nothing to do with their husbands. Women given as slaves were usually given as sexual property to be a wife, concubine, possibly wife or concubine to the son. It became complicated, so they could not be let free in the same way. In a society where a woman only had value for her virginity. Let me just look up and see.
I'm looking. Oh, hold on.
So this is where a lot of people would consider me to not be a good Christian because I can't quote chapter and verse.
I'm terrible with remembering chapter and verse. That's why I just memorize the entire content. It's actually easier for me. I don't know why. My brain is weird. It's very weird.
I don't have a big enough iceberg for all the penguins that are required.
This one I was wrong. It's not Leviticus. It's Exodus 21:3, although there's probably a section for it in Leviticus too. The law can be a bit repetitive at times. They were stitching together a lot of stuff from different sources. Exodus 21:3.
Exodus 21:2 to 6.
2 to 6. Thank you. Yeah. The Elohist source from the Northern Kingdom of Israel. Yes. Everyone, please get your Bibles out. Atheists, I know you have them. Mine is held together with duct tape, by the way. I literally call it the duct tape Bible.
I don't have one. Mine is still on the computer, which is 9 out of 10 times faster for me anyway. So I don't.
Tisk, sir. Tisk, tisk.
I mean, it isn't.
Granted, that quotation, I believe I was quoting the King James Version because I was listening to a lecture by Robert Greene Ingersoll about it, and he was from like 150 years ago, so he was definitely using the KJV.
Right.
Lilith, in all fairness, in my country, the Bible isn't such a big thing anymore.
I know, love. I know.
The last thing that I saw on TV was a couple of guys who had put a cover on the Bible saying that was the Quran, and they were reading verses from the Bible to people in the streets. And everyone agreed that this book should be banned, and people following that religion should be banned. And then they took off the artificial cover to show that they were actually... Yes, so...
Tim mentioned that with a copy of Harry Potter. Not the reading part, just the fake cover freaking people out thing.
Yeah. I can't find what I was looking for there.
Exodus 21...
Well, no, I was looking at
in all honesty, we're not expecting you to come up with something that would just make that go away, because it's not there. You can look.
I'd like to go back actually to the source topic being one of morality, because I believe you may have fallen prey to there's a bit of dishonesty in the morality apologetic trope that has always bothered me. Because when I ask people about objective morality, I often find they're trying to use it to beg the question. They're like defining it as God's will, even though there's, that's not something that like we can all objectively verify. Like, look, I'm holding a lipstick. Everybody can see I'm holding a clear. And then, using it to argue for God. So they're kind of assuming their answer. One of the best definitions I've heard of morality that is actually very clear and can be discussed in clear terms is by Scott Clifton, also known on the internet as Theoretical Bullshit. He did a treatise on morality about 11 years ago on YouTube, and it's actually still brilliant, still very, very good. And he points out the importance of defining morality, if we're going to talk about good and bad, in clear terms that we can use to actually have a discussion, as you would with any definition. You want something functional, that we can both agree this is the definition, and then we can discuss, what aligns with it, what doesn't align with it, what's arguable, discuss. Because I find a lot of people will treat subjective as the same as arbitrary, and subjective can often just mean dependent on circumstance, which morality often is. You'll find we're always discussing what are the circumstances behind this action, what is the motivation, what happened. There's no action that is inherently always wrong. It's we start adding, murder is wrong. Well, murder is killing someone. Is killing someone always wrong? No, circumstances, yada, 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 yada. Usually wrong, definitely. But again, if subjective simply means that there are circumstances that we need to judge in light of, then morality has to be subjective, because circumstances, actions do not occur in a void. There's circumstances and consequences. And I'm sure especially you served in the armed forces. I am sure you can think of many an instance where an action you would not normally wish to take might be the best in the circumstances, because the circumstances, quite frankly, suck.
Right. And if I may speak to that,
please.
You're, I think, making a confusion there between objective and subjective, in the sense that you're saying that circumstances change whether or not something is moral or immoral.
In
really
a sense.
It really what it comes down to is it becomes a moral dilemma. Which is more moral in a certain circumstance? Is it wrong to kill someone? Yes. Is it wrong to kill someone if they are about to kill somebody else. So now you're in a moral dilemma. I remember years and years ago. This is when I was way back, just joining the military. It was a article written by an F-16 pilot, and he was asked what he did for a living, and this was in one of the professional journals. And he said, "If I want to be perfectly honest, I have to say that I'm a hired killer, but I'm a hired killer with a conscience, because which is more moral? To have the ability to stop someone from being killed and use that ability, or in that case, killing someone, or to not stop somebody from being killed?" And his answer was, his final answer was, he summed it up as, he said, I guess you would have to say I'm a moral killer, a hired killer with a conscience. And it's that moral dilemma. It's not necessarily that the circumstances change whether or not something's right or wrong.
I could come up with a lot easier example, though. I think that killing a completely innocent person who's doing absolutely nothing wrong at some time may be justified. And I can give you an example which actually happened in real life. The police were called to a burning building. Firefighters were on scene, and someone was on top of the roof. They had no way to get to him, wouldn't have a way to get to him, and he shouted, "Please shoot me." And they did, in order to prevent him from being burned alive. So, killing someone who has done nothing wrong, there are instances in which that is justified.
Right, and again, it goes back to my point that you had a moral dilemma to weigh. Do you kill someone, or do you allow them to burn?
Where you have two bad things and you choose the lesser of the evils.
Yes.
Yeah, I understand that.
Both are still morally wrong, but you have to make that decision sometimes.
But is it then morally wrong if it's the best decision in the circumstances? I could even give you a case where we might consider it to be morally laudable. You said you're a father, sir.
Yes.
And now I remember reading in the news a few years back about a gentleman, probably about your age, who heard a noise and in the middle of the night got up and went down to his 16-year-old daughter's room and found his neighbor, about a 50-year-old man, wearing a hood and carrying a knife and rope and wearing gloves and nothing else. And wouldn't you know it, well, he was restraining the man. The man didn't make it. Tear. So often we would say something like that is actually quite morally laudable. But again, because of the circumstance. And there's a concept of innocence too, and of, people who deserve protection being the innocent person more than the person who is attempting to harm someone. So we discuss things like that because morality in practice is always that. It is always a case of circumstances, not those particular circumstances, obviously. But it seems to me that you're setting it up in a way as to say that any action or every action could be wrong.
I think where we disagree is what you're referring to as circumstances. I've referred to as degrees of morality. In the example you used, is it morally wrong to rape a child? Yes. Is it morally wrong to kill someone? Yes. Is it morally, which of those has a higher morality attached to it? Preventing the child from being raped or killing someone?
See, I would hold that might actually be a morally good action in that instance, assuming that you're referring to a type of scenario I'm assuming you're referring to. Because, yeah, it's, again, but the very fact that we can discuss these conundrums indicates a kind of subjectivity. And I want to be careful using that term because the way apologists use it, they often use it as though it meant arbitrary. Like, I'm in the mood for chicken today is the same thing as what we've been discussing, and it very much isn't. It is not subjective in that way at all, because I don't think that's what subjective means. I think that's what arbitrary means. But then we're both still appealing to the standards of harm, standards of justice. The way that in that video I referenced, Scott defines morality is that a thing shall be considered morally good if it adds to the health, well-being, or happiness of a person, and shall be considered, or prevents unnecessary harm or suffering, or does both, and that evil would be the converse of that. And that moral judgments would basically be consistent of balancing that as much as possible given whatever circumstances, which appears to be what we're both saying.
We have sorry, I want to interrupt, but we have a question from the chat that goes along these lines. Hunthovind, that's not his real name, by the way, said, can you ask him, is there a way to represent the aspect of the morals that you represent in the aspect of beneficial or detrimental when it comes to Scripture? And I was about to provide a few examples where I think Scripture might disagree with what you currently think is moral. So,
let me look here. I'm just trying to read the question you got up there.
The question is:
admittedly, I found the phrasing a bit.
Is there a way to represent the aspect of morals that you represent in the aspect of beneficial or detrimental when it comes to Scripture? It's.
So are you asking, what do you do when the Bible advocates something immoral, or is that the question?
That's what I'm trying to...
I'm a bit confused by the phrasing.
I think the question is, can you... does your current morality reflect the morality that is proposed in the Bible? Or does it conflict at times?
I think properly understood, it is from what is in the Bible. I think a lot of people misunderstand what is said in the Bible. There's a lot of things that are talked about in the Bible that people will say, oh, there it is in the Bible, so obviously the Bible approves of that.
I can give you several examples of that.
I don't think it's necessary that the Bible approves of everything that's stated to have occurred in it, whether it actually happened or not. Some of the tales are more mythological, but there are specific instances of laws or specific declarations of God, go and do thus and so, or claim to have been of God, obviously, by whoever wrote it, that are absolutely immoral.
Okay.
By the standard you yourself have been advocating during our discussion. So then how do you address those?
So here's the question I would ask. Sorry, I tend to be, I teach for a living and obviously teach. So I ask questions in my...
No, that's good. Questions are good.
That's no problem at all.
So some people get annoyed by it.
No. We don't.
So I think one of the things that gets missed, and I've been reading a book by Paul Copan, is God a Moral Monster? And one of the things that he brings out is, are the laws that are in the Bible the ideal? And as you pointed out, Lilith, some of the laws on slavery obviously are not the ideal. But with the ancient Near East or ancient Middle East, with what was going on at the time, I think if you compare, what you see is that the Bible was making a step towards a more ideal. At the end, by the New Testament, you see Paul saying that there is neither, in Christ, there is neither Jew nor Gentile. There's neither.
Here's where I have to step in. Here's where I have to step in, because this is a very common apologetic. And my question to that is, God can tell you not to eat shellfish, not to wear mixed fabrics, not to murder, not to steal, not to commit adultery. But nowhere in the Bible was God able to say, you should not own another human being as property. This, to me, if you're going down that route, that is lazy apologetics, saying, well, it was a sign of the times and God tried to at least do his best in order to get to a better society. He didn't. He absolutely didn't.
There were actually...
Hold on, Lilith, hold on. He made the rules for slavery, not just for the Hebrews, for indentured servitude, which is a form of slavery, which is also completely immoral.
So there were no laws for slavery in any of the other societies before
No,
that?
of course there were, but that's not the issue.
We're not talking about societies.
Peter, let me just say this one thing.
No, I want to have this out. Hold on. I want to have this out.
No, I know. I'm saying something that's relevant to the point.
Just a minute. We're not talking about societies. We're talking about, if the Bible is correct, then we're talking about the ultimate lawgiver who is above any society and is supposed to have all of the wisdom. It's not about societies. It's about someone who, first of all, supposedly had the power to do so, should know how wrong and how immoral it is, and yet he did nothing other than making rules for it, which one of the rules includes that you can beat your slave as long as he doesn't die for 2 days. If he dies on the 3rd day, there's no punishment for the slave owner. That's absolutely horrific.
Look that one up. I want the reference on that one. I know the verse you're talking about. I think the reason that argument is so unconvincing to so many people is that you discussed morality as being something based outside of, well, frankly, outside of nature, which I don't find convincing. But if there are two distinct elements here that I think we need to classify, because as a Christian, I am presuming, and please correct me if I am wrong, that you believe that the moral standard is derived from God and that God is the God of the Bible.
Yes, it is based on his nature.
Okay. And then the issue being is that if the God of the Bible is indeed the basis of a moral standard, then why was he not able to do more than the nations round about? Because, well, indeed, there were many brutalities in the nations at that time, and there's no argument there. It brings to mind, there was a debate about, I don't think you're a Catholic. There was a debate about if the Catholic Church is a force for good in the world. And Christopher Hitchens and Stephen Fry versus, well, they were on the, obviously, against side. And one of the ladies talking about morality said, do not expect the Catholic Church to have, some special knowledge when nobody else knew how severe these crimes were. And Stephen's response is one of the more emotional moments. It was really quite an intellectual debate overall, but it was one of the more emotional moments where he said, we don't have, how could we know? Then what on earth are you for if you didn't know this was wrong when nobody else knew this was wrong? Basically, why is God keeping moral step with humanity? And why is he not able to do, if he's able to nitpick on so many finer points, of ceremonial whatnots, why is he not able to make larger moral steps? Okay, that's the part that people find unconvincing. It's right. The part that is more dramatic. Like if you're making such great claims for God, why can't he live up to them?
All right. So let me look here. Oh, there it is. Okay, so we could go through the 10 Commandments, but if we go into Matthew and we look at what Jesus said there, he was asked by one of the Pharisees, one of the teachers, what was the greatest commandment in the law? And he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like this: love your neighbor as yourself. So let me ask you, what else is God going to do and allow free will? What else is God going to do other than tell people, love your neighbor as yourself? Which, if you look at the Ten Commandments, the first few dealt with how the Israelites were to deal with their relationship with God. The last half was how they would deal with each other. God already told the Israelites how to deal with each other. But over and over again, you see they didn't listen. And the problem here is what you are judging is you're judging God based on how people followed him. Basically, you're looking at the evils. Hang on.
I'm not.
I let you speak. Let me speak, please.
Fair enough.
What you're doing is you're looking at God presented this moral law, right, in the Ten Commandments, which they pretty much immediately began to violate. Because, as I said at the beginning, one of the things I believe is that we live in an imperfect world full of imperfect human beings. And I believe that that is because of the fall, and we can have a discussion on that if you'd like. But I don't remember who it was that said it, but somebody said you can't judge a religion by its heretics. And I feel like what you're doing is you are trying to look at imperfect human beings imperfectly following a perfect law and a perfect God and indicting God because of that. And in reality, the message of Christianity is
I have to object. I have to object. Sorry, I have to object because that's not what we're doing. We're judging God on what he said in the Bible. It's not about the people. Keep in mind.
I quoted a law on slavery. So hold on. I'd like to ask a clarifying question.
Wait a minute. No, let me finish. I never was a Christian. I don't believe the Bible is true. And there are lots of reasons to believe it isn't, because it's demonstrably wrong a lot of the times, especially when it comes to describing the natural world. It has everything wrong.
So
everything is wrong. The earth is not flat. We're not covered by a dome. We never were. Locusts don't have 4 legs. They have 6 legs. Bats aren't birds. All those things. Everything about how the natural world is described is wrong. There's no tree or mountain from which you can see every kingdom on earth, because that would only work if the earth was flat. So what I'm saying is I at least, and I need to speak for myself. If I'm judging God, I'm going by the text and by what God does in the text. And a lot of the things that God does are clearly immoral. And you would even describe them as immoral if I were to ask you just a few simple questions.
So, as far as your claim that the Bible is demonstrably wrong, I think the problem is if you don't understand the type of literature that it is, there are things in the Bible that are to be taken literally. There are things in the Bible such as covered by a dome, the 4 corners. I'm assuming that's where you're getting the reference to the earth being flat. That is figurative speech. There are things, and Christians, I will admit, do this also. They take
but let's take something. Let's take something a lot easier. Noah's flood. Do you think it happened?
Yes. Now, what was it? I don't know.
So, if I was to tell you that the whole idea of Noah's flood goes against geology, goes against history, documented history, because obviously the flood didn't happen in Egypt and it didn't happen in China, because we have writings from before and after the flood that just seem to continue, no mention of a flood, and the people are still there, still referring to those who were there before. It's a continuous history.
There's every major society, every major people group
Has a floodlet.
Flood story.
Yes, because there are floods all across the world, and still happening to this day. I mean, if you look at Katrina, there was a massive
The
flood.
2004 tsunami,
Yes.
that was
The floods are a thing. I'm not saying floods aren't a thing. What I'm saying is that a global flood never happened. We not only have no evidence that it ever happened, we have good evidence that it didn't happen, which is the most important part. We have clear evidence that it could never, ever have happened as described in the Bible.
So I don't
not
know
a
if you're
global flood.
familiar-
Are you arguing for a local flood?
There's different ways to read that, but let me just throw this out there. There was an article. This has been. I'm trying to think now how long ago this was. Probably 2019, 2018. Don't quote me on the exact date. But it came out in, and I'm drawing a blank now. That penguin has left the iceberg. But it was a scientific discovery that in deep earth drilling, they actually discovered a form of water that is actually contained in the rock of the deep earth crust. And based on measurements they took, and again, I wish I could give you, because I know what the response is going to be. Well, you don't have a source, so therefore it can't be true. But when they looked at the amount of water there, and again, I'm not a scientist, so I don't have the exact chemical composition of what that was. But when they looked at that, they did some measurements, and based on their drilling, they said, if this water were to be released, it would be enough to cover the entire Earth. They said the equivalent of about 3 oceans. And then I would reference you.
I very much
reference you to
doubt
the
that
Jonah story
because
you can doubt it.
Well, I've talked to a geologist just a short time ago who said there is not enough water on the planet, not on the surface and not below it, to cover the entire world as we see it right now. Another thing is,
I don't actually doubt
what this article was.
Another thing is, and this is quite easy way maybe to explain it. I take it you use a car, right?
Yeah.
And so you use, probably you still have a car that's running on gas, which is
not as cool as the one you have.
Well, okay, but
you didn't go electric. He means, I think.
But
no.
So what I'm trying to say is, you're driving a car that is running on fossil fuel that has been that is the result of millions of years, and not only that, the way we find it is because we are using the geology that points out that the Earth is billions of years old in order to find the fossil fuel. They have tried to find fuel according to the flood method, and it always fails because it doesn't work. How would you explain that?
There's an interesting inference there.
I don't see how that's pertinent to the discussion of whether or not this
It is clear evidence.
Well,
it's clear evidence that the flood didn't happen. That's what I'm trying to say.
How so?
Because if the flood happened, then we would be able to find
because
fuel.
The global world would salt everything, and all life would be dead, and there would be a single massive deposit. Because layers in the earth are not delineated by a certain number of inches, but rather by the way they're laid down. You can see, if you go somewhere like the Grand Canyon, where you have many, many levels of sedimentary rock that were then slowly cut away, you can see the distinction in layers, how they sort by hydraulic action. But there's one of the things
in the
Peter said.
You see that where roads are cut through mountains all the time. You can see the the bending and the curvature of the rock layers.
Yeah.
Natural gas. My father worked in the natural gas industries most of his life. And that's how they stored natural gas, is they would actually pump it back into the ground in these arched layers.
Interesting way to do
But
it.
still, yeah, it's actually kind of cool. But still, I don't see how a flood or lack thereof has bearing on where we find oil and we don't find oil.
It is based on what geologists have found out about the Earth over time, about the layers, about where we need to expect fossil fuel, because of
Believe it or not, there's actually. It's. I think this is somewhat getting off of topic, because we were talking about God and Christianity and morality, and then we went down a literal reading of the flood. And I believe you may also be referencing the idea of young Earth creationism and a 6,000-year-old, which is not possible with fossil fuels and yada yada yada. But this is we're branching out in too many directions at once.
Yeah, you're right.
I do want to address something you said earlier, Dave, about not judging a group by its heretics, which is fine to a point. But I would like to point out that the only scripture I've quoted thus far is the law. And I'm very careful not to quote heretics, but in this case, to quote something that, according to the doctrines, is supposedly God speaking. I don't think it was. I think it was a law written by people who did what people do, which is honestly very explicable. And as Peter mentioned at one point, he talked about the methods they use for drilling and everything like that. I would say that one of the things I find most indicative in science, most helpful in understanding the truth of something, a principle that is used in science more than anywhere else, but that I think has almost universal application, is that accurate information has practical application. If you can make a prediction based on something, you're certainly not guaranteed that you're 100% right with one accurate prediction. But if you can make multiple accurate predictions, clear, specific predictions that could go wrong, but don't, then you're clearly on to something, even if you don't have the full picture yet. And that's what I wanted to circle back to initially when it came to methodology, when it came to figuring out what's true. And because all of us, I mean, just by sheer statistical probability, I'm sure everyone here is wrong about something. None of us are completely right. So then how do you figure out when you're wrong? How do you figure out when an idea is reliable? How do you test an idea? And that's, I think, a different way of thinking about things that I really want to ask believers to consider. Because my objection to the methods of faith is that it doesn't produce a consistent result. So, you described a meaningful experience. But people with a different faith background, whether a different theological interpretation of Christianity, or a Muslim who has an entirely different faith history, they were taught differently, different doctrines, they also will describe deeply meaningful experiences that they feel confirmed what they had been taught.
Right, Mormons and yet, are the same. They have the burning in the bosom.
Exactly.
Which is one of the reasons. Which is one of the reasons why, I think a lot of Christians. We can go back to where this originated, but there are people, and I believe it is 100% legitimate and accurate and truthful, that only have an experiential case. But part of what I try to do as an apologist is to show Christians that we don't have to just rely on the experiential. There are evidences out there that point to, obviously, like I said, we're dealing with historical accounts and historical issues, historical events. We can't with 100% certainty say that these indeed happen. But when we start looking at the evidences, when we look at the evidences of cosmology, teleology, biology even, put all of these together into a cumulative case. I'm not saying that I can throw out a cosmological argument or the Kalam cosmological argument, and that's going to prove to everybody, what the case is, or 100% prove the case. But what I'm saying is just like a court case, it's not usually, sometimes it is, it's not usually one piece of evidence that convicts someone. It's multiple pieces of evidence built together into a cumulative case that shows that the most likely answer in a court case is that the individual either is or isn't guilty. As an apologist, what I look at is all of these different things. I look at science, the things that are explained and unexplained in science, and try to, and we all do this, science does this, we infer based on, our past experience, our philosophy. I don't know if this is you or not, but a naturalist will look at events and will only consider natural causes. What I do is I look at something and I go, is there a natural cause for it, or is there a cause outside of nature?
That's incorrect. The thing is that's incorrect. The thing is, science can only investigate the natural world. We can't investigate outside of the natural world. But if a God would interact with the natural world by, let's say, doing a miracle, then we could investigate
creating the universe.
Well, we already know that
nothing?
We already know no. So the universe wasn't created out of nothing. There's no one on the planet who claims that. The only people who are claiming that are, and I'm sorry, I have to say that, misinformed apologists. No one ever claimed that.
Stephen Hawking,
and he never claimed that. Lawrence Krauss wrote a book, A Universe from Nothing, in which he specifically lines out that a universe didn't come into existence from nothing, that there is no such thing as nothing, and the nothing that he is talking about is actually something. And
so then it's not nothing.
It's not nothing. Nothing can't exist. Nothing is impossible. Because the moment something...
And what scientific experiment did you perform to say that nothing can exist?
I was about to explain that. If something comes into existence, it is something. It is no longer nothing. So... Okay,
but what existed before it became something?
Quantum fields.
Usually something else. We actually have no... Because the Kalam cosmological argument is problematic all the way through.
Yes, there's two wrong premises. It has two wrong premises, which we know by now are wrong. Because I talked to Sean Carroll, another cosmologist, not too long ago, who so the current thing in science is that people are walking away from the current Big Bang model because we have new evidence coming in. And so
it's not to say that the Big Bang is wrong. It's just being understood differently, and there's more to it.
So what I'm
saying, as it always is.
What I'm saying is that before people thought that Big Bang was the start of everything, that's no longer the case. The current understanding is that the universe has been here forever, is eternal. And so
the Big Bang was never the start of everything. It was the start of our universe in its current state.
Yes.
We can't look before it. It doesn't mean that there was nothing before it, or even that that's a meaningful question. It just means it's the start of our universe in its current state.
What? Oh, hold on. I wasn't finished explaining because we know. So one of the premises of the Big Bang of the Kalam is everything that begins to exist has a cause. We already know for a fact that that is wrong, because we have virtual particles that come into existence, go out of existence without any observable cause. And
production.
Actually, there the problem there is you're dealing with the observation problem, because just many scientists have said just by observation we alter those quantum particles.
No, I'm not talking about quantum particles. I'm talking about virtual particles. Those have been observed to come into existence, go out of existence without any known cause.
I'm going to be honest, guys. I think we are all getting out of our depth here.
Mm-hmm.
We are none of us physicists.
We're not
and
physicists?
I want to put a stop here. I know, it's shocking. But there is one thing actually that does bring to mind, and I'd like to point this out and maybe give it to you as something to think about. Just going forward, not expecting you to totally rewrite your whole worldview in the next 60 seconds. But I was raised a Christian. I was also raised a creationist. And as a smart period in my life, I ended up training with some law enforcement officers. And I found out a couple interesting things. We were trying to be trained to tell if someone's lying. And the line that always stuck with me is, a lie is only 3 questions deep. That always stuck in my head. Because there are lies, intentional lies, I am a dog. That is obviously a lie. That is me making a false statement. But there are also things that are not true that a person may believe or may feel comfortable believing, but may not necessarily be true. And I found that those two are only about 3 questions deep. And one of the things that really angered me, viscerally angered me when I learned it, and this was long before, when I was still a Christian, this was before I became an atheist, that was a totally separate thing, was when I discovered how much of creationism relied on lying about science and deliberately misunderstanding it, misrepresenting what evolution was so that people would be scared of it and think it was ridiculous and yada, yada, yada. And there was really conscientious, deliberate misinformation I'm not talking you and me people levels. I'm talking about your Ken Tovens and your Ken Hams and your people who were essentially being paid to promote creationism. And what they did is
people who make millions a year
and build terrible arc parks that are really just a giant set of signs everywhere that is very boring. But anyway,
so you'll enjoy this. My family and I actually went to the art exhibit over Christmas. It was very interesting. I did not agree with all of the propositions that he made. There were quite a few I disagreed with. In my opinion, he comes very close to theistic evolution, even though he, in the poster, they actually say this is not theistic evolution.
He's advocating for
a type of evolution that can possibly fast.
He's advocating for turbo hyper evolution after the flood. Because we had, according to AIG, we had 14,000 animals on the ark, and we now have millions of species on Earth, and
that's
all of that.
One of many ways we know a worldwide flood, especially a worldwide flood that long ago, is impossible. But that's neither here nor there.
Yes, that's a
the issue is that a lot of these arguments I have found, by looking into them more and more, and by listening to the explanations and counter apologetics by actual physicists or biologists, depending on what the argument is and who has the expertise, so often relied upon misunderstandings. And the initial misunderstanding would have been understandable. I mean, we've been discussing virtual particles, and quite frankly, I don't think anybody here is qualified, myself included, to give an informed opinion on virtual particles.
I was getting ready to ask what virtual particles are, because that's a term that I've not heard. So
exactly. It's part of quantum mechanics, and even people who understand quantum mechanics say, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics. It's the most unintuitive thing in the universe. So, not understanding that is not a sign of, it's just a sign that you haven't devoted your entire life to physics, because not everybody can do that, because, the human race needs to eat and stuff. So
we
fair.
got a few physicists in our church. I'll have to ask them about that.
Well, and that might not be their area of expertise. Physics is broad. It's awesome. I love it as a topic, but I understand I have limitations, and that's okay. But I've noticed very often that when someone who is an expert in whatever particular field of physics or of biology or whatever talks about it, they're like, oh, no, that's not what this means. And then they explain it. And their explanation makes sense, but it doesn't line up at all with the apologetic. And this is one of the things that bothered me about apologetics so much, is that why I found so many arguments over and 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 over that were based on misrepresenting something that particular apologist had no qualifications in. William Lane Craig is a good example. He talks about physics all the time. His degree is in philosophy. And actually, the video I mentioned earlier, Scott Clifton, it was quite, because Craig always made a thing out of not debating anyone who didn't have a degree in philosophy, because that was what he had a degree in. And he made an exception for Scott Clifton, and it was kind of a big deal at the time. But then he's always talking about physics. Yeah, this, like I said, this happened about 10 years ago. But it was, I don't even think it was an in-person, it was more, they engaged in public dialogue. But anyway, he, because Scott Clifton has an interest in philosophy, even if not necessarily a degree in it, but he always talks instead about physics. And I have listened to so many physicists explain how he's misrepresenting the physics. And the first time that would be just a misunderstanding. Like I said, we all hear there's a limit to how much we can reasonably discuss physics without being wildly out of our element. And there's nothing wrong with that. Nobody is an expert in everything. But after the response had been made by the qualified physicist saying, no, that's not how that works. You're not representing it correctly. This isn't your wheelhouse. Please put the toy down and go back to your wheelhouse. And he continued to use the same arguments and continued and continued and continued. That's when I said, this man's dishonest. And that's something that I found so many times in apologetics that really bothered me, because anyone could think, oh, this supports my point, and have, a misconception about something they're not an expert in. Anyone could have that happen. I'm sure I've had that happen. But not listening to the people who actually do have the expertise, who, it's their job to do that thing when they correct you. That's the part that I've come into so many times in apologetic arguments, and it really just gets my goat, because I hate dishonesty. I really do. It really bugs me. And
I have to go look it up, because you mentioned Ken Ham. Ken Ham is contradicting himself on his website, and I need to go back and find the articles. I know it was, one article was about the camel, the other one was about the llama, and so both accounts
closely related.
Both accounts that he has on his website are completely contradicting each other. And it is because people there are thousands of articles on the website, so people will probably not notice. There was one YouTuber who did, and who pointed it out, and I'll have to go back and find those too. That is. Oh,
send me the link. If that's Prophet of Zod, that should be fun.
If I can find that, I'll send you both the link. But that is a clear piece of evidence.
Of Ken Ham.
It's a clear piece of evidence that he knows he's lying, because if you write this article and then write an article that goes exactly against what you just wrote before, then you're lying. You're just trying to fit things into.
If you don't print a retraction or an adjustment.
Yes, and they didn't. So as Lilith pointed out.
Can I ask a
sure.
Please do.
Go ahead.
Question?
Knock yourself out.
So Lilith, can I ask you an uncomfortable question?
Please do.
You said what infuriates you is someone that believes something when what they've been told is not necessarily the truth?
No,
Or
I said
something to that
dishonesty
effect. There you
infuriates
go.
me.
There you go.
Just clarification.
There you go. Okay, yeah. No, thank you for that.
Mistakes don't infuriate me. We all make them, you know.
Right. So, would you accept the proposition that perhaps the information that you're getting is erroneous, and you've made those decisions based on past experiences with, let's say, with the church?
Well, that would require a couple of presuppositions. One, that I had bad
Uh-oh.
experiences with the church, and two, that I was looking to disprove Christianity, neither of which are true. Okay, well, I
Okay.
mean, I was in church for like 30 years, so of course I had some bad experiences. Like, you're not going to be part of any club. You could be part of the Rotary Club for 30 years. You're going to have a squabble with someone at some point. But overall, I have positive memories of the church and good relationships and mentors. And I initially started assuming I was going to prove Christianity to be true, perhaps not in the way I had initially perceived as a child, because you put away childish things and things are
Exactly.
more complicated when you get older and all that. Um,
And
which
that's really,
fair
you could
enough.
use that as my progression from, the kid who had a purely experiential, is that redundant, experiential experience?
I suppose it does. Yeah, but
But
I
then
get
on
what you mean.
into looking at the evidences, right? It's kind of the same way that I went. But I'll admit I kind of cheated a little bit. I went and watched some of the shows that you were in, and I remember you saying something about kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. I don't remember. Oh,
That's
oh,
yeah.
there he is.
That's not cheating, by the way. That I really like that
Oh, please
you
do.
watch our shows.
I
I mean,
stand by everything
yeah,
I've said, and if I'm
No,
wrong, I'll
yeah.
tell you.
yeah. If we said
But
something
you
that
brought
is
out
stupid,
that.
we like our guests to point out how stupid we are for saying that. So, and that's never a problem.
No,
And
not at all.
it has happened, and I've been corrected. So, I just wanted to say that.
But yeah, Lilith, you had said something about, and I don't remember the exact context and how it was, but something that you said something to the effect that what infuriated you and kind of led you to leave the church was the hypocrisy in the church. Something to that
No,
effect.
no, not the hypocrisy in the church. I believe, uh, again, without the context, it's hard for me to
Right. Yeah,
recollect
yeah.
exactly what I said and what I meant. I've discussed a little bit about the hypocrisy in apologetics. And what I found by investigating multiple different lines of apologetic argument and listening to experts in different fields, what they had to say about these arguments, at some point, there was absolutely a point in my mind where I said, nothing true needs to be defended by this many lies. Like,
Would
once
that
is a
include
mistake,
atheism?
twice might be a mistake. You like 7 examples later across multiple disciplines. I'm just going, ugh.
So,
But
so again, asking tough questions. Would that include atheism?
but that's the thing. Atheism is the null set. It's not believing the propositions, religious propositions. And
So you don't have a belief
about what? You're going to have to be
about
more
the
specific.
existence of God. So if I asked you the question and I said, "Does God exist?" and your possible answers are yes, no, don't know, where would you land?
I'd honestly land on no, beyond a reasonable doubt. But again, that depends, and I would probably respond with a question myself, and I have done it before. Asking people to define God, because this is another thing I noticed in my explorations, because my idea of God changed, as it does. No, but if you have the same idea of God at 30 that you had at 4, you done something wrong. you,
And yes,
you,
I mean even with Christians, I would say that's
oh,
true.
I was a Christian for both of those, and absolutely, it's so, but even as my idea of God changed, I continued to get conflicting accounts and conflicting definitions. And I think some of the arguments we've had in this conversation may stem from assumptions about the definition of God you hold, which are not necessarily wrong. Most Christians are Trinitarians. It's a fairly safe assumption to make. There are some that are not, but most are. So there you go. You've got an assumption. Probably right. might be wrong. I think a lot of people are so used to a certain type of an idea of God, the omni-everything God, omni, this, that, and the next thing, that they sort of assume that that's just a given. And it's not. It's especially not if some of those traits contradict each other. The idea of being omnipotent contradicts the idea of being immortal. I can kill myself. Apparently God can't. That then you get into the immortality of the soul. But it's a contradiction in terms.
That's the whole different show or two.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure we could converse forever on that. I'm just touching it just as an example. So I found within myself that my own concept of God was not coherent. And I worked for a long time to try and, I'm growing. It's all good, bring it in. And I found it couldn't be, and be honest. And I will always choose being honest. So right. When you say, does a God exist or not exist? I'm going to make a judgment call depending on what you mean by God. And I need you to be very clear. And that's why, again, I suggested with the definition of morality. I find that a lot of the things that these arguments, spin out on is when you don't have a clear definition of what you're talking about. And at the top of the show, we mentioned I've been doing a Blasphemers Bible study with Aaron Ra. And one of the things I have always loved about Aaron is he gives very clear, very specific definitions for what he is talking about. And I've never found consistent definitions for God that have been able to stand up to those three questions.
If I can just quickly interrupt, because this is a line of questioning that I actually like very much. And so I've told you, Dave, when we did the intake, that once you come on, we will offer you a second show in which you decide on the topic of the show. And you won't tell us until we are live, so we can prepare.
You can bring questions.
Yes.
Uh-oh.
So
even more than I've asked already.
And I'm I'm really hoping that you will take us up on this, because not a lot of theists that we have on our show will actually come back and do that. Most actually don't. I
had a second with Joseph Nola, which is too bad.
Yes,
he's a Jesuit I actually like.
We had a guy from Australia, Ryan, and I forgot his last name, who came back for I think 2 more shows, which I really enjoyed. We had really good conversations. What we've never had is someone to come on our show and challenge our position. So if that is something you would want to do, please do so, because that is the one thing that hasn't happened yet. And I would really be looking forward to that. Someone who really digs in to my position, to Lilith's position, and tries to figure out whether or not we are wrong. That would be a really great show. And that would be one that I would
And I love
really
your method
enjoy.
of asking questions.
Yeah.
And Peter, that's, I got to say, I'll give you this compliment here. That's one of the things that after we had first started talking there on Twitter, which, as we all know, can just, as you say, become a dumpster fire.
Yeah, really easy.
I was very impressed with your, not a confrontational, not just an interest in other people's beliefs. And I respect that you're willing to basically turn the tables on yourself and allow your beliefs to be challenged.
Yes.
I think that's, and we talked about this in our pre-interview, the intake interview. I think a lot of times we've reached the point between Christians and atheists that we talk by each other.
Yep.
And, we all have, we were talking about presuppositions a little bit ago. We all have presuppositions. We all come to the table with these presuppositions, whether it be on the atheist side, whether it be on the Christian side. And that's going to determine, how we interpret data that we look at, right? So, and I know I don't think you have a real high opinion of Frank Turek, but one of the things that he says is science doesn't say anything scientists do. So it is how you interpret the data that we're looking at. So, yeah, with any kind of presupposition that we come to, because we're human beings, we all have our own ideas, right? And just to give me the opportunity to come on here, and I think, we said, we both realize I'm not going to change your worldview, you're not going to change mine. But I think
Well,
it's
not
important just to
totally.
sit
That doesn't
down.
mean we can't give each other something to think about.
Right, and just sit down. I have been for a long time, all through college. One of my favorite sayings, and now that's college has been many many years ago. But one of my favorite sayings was either Socrates or Plato. I think it was Socrates. An unexamined life is not worth living.
Well,
So,
Socrates never wrote, and Plato used Socrates as a
well,
character, but he was also
yeah,
a student. So your answer to which one said it is yes.
both. Yeah. Yes. So
Yes.
yeah, but yeah, I think it needs to be examined, and I think Christians need to examine. Obviously, my opinion is that the more we examine it, the more we grow in our understanding of who God is and our relationship with Him. And understand, like I said, what brought me to be a Christian, the sacrifice that was made for us. The separation that was caused by sin in the world, and the plan that God made. And it's funny you mentioned beforehand. I think during the when we were talking just before the show, you were doing an Old Testament study. The Sunday morning class I teach, we just went through a brief survey of the Old Testament, and throughout that you see God revealing Himself. And maybe take this back to your class.
Not
You
just the Old
kind of
Testament, not
look
just
for this.
not just the Old Testament. We're
No,
going
no,
through
yeah,
the
right,
entire
We'll get to the
Bible.
New Testament eventually.
right,
We're reading
right.
But
through.
it's
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 it's long.
I
But
think
something to look
it's a
for
two-year
is the
project, I think.
character of God. At least, if and this was just a short. I mean, it's a 14-week to go all the way through the Bible, so it's very cursory. But something to consider as you're going through it with your class. Instead of approaching it, here's kind of maybe, I guess maybe the challenge I would give you. Instead of approaching it as a skeptic, approach it to look at how God is revealing Himself to a people that the plan was in the end they were going to be the ones that, and when you look at God's chosen people, a lot of people think that, well, that was God's people and that was all there was to it. There was actually more to it. They were, if you look at Romans, I'm sure Lilith, you're very familiar with Romans. Paul talks about they were chosen not just to be God's people, but to give an understanding of who God was and who God is to the Gentiles. Paul talks about through God's people, through the Hebrews,
Our salvation came through the Jews.
through
Yep.
and by revealing God to the rest of the world.
One of the things I take issue with now with the Christian view of the Bible is the way it entirely discounts the history of how Jews view their own scriptures. Actual Jews, not the Jews for Jesus cult, which is actually not Jews. They're a weird Baptist offshoot. Don't bring them up with Jews. Really annoys them. But it's the difference in how the text is understood by Jews, by the actual, the people whose book it is initially, is very vast. And if you get not a Christian rabbi, but just an ordinary Jewish rabbi, and ask, you find the perspective is vastly different from the Christian one. And I
I
don't
would
think,
expect that,
well, yeah, but
right?
I
Because
don't think
it's
it's,
again, it goes back to the presuppositions that you're coming to it with. I
I don't
don't
have the
know, but
audacity to tell Jews how to understand their own scriptures is the problem. I
But first
don't.
century Jews did.
First century
Right.
Jews argued with, well, I mean, there's the old joke, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. That's,
Well, no,
you
what
know,
I'm saying is
Jews
who
argue
were
with
the
these things, yeah.
original? Jesus and the original disciples were Jewish. So, isn't it possible that over time, for whatever reasons, you could argue power, just whatever, the Jewish hierarchy, the Jewish people, had kind of distorted what had originally been told to them? That's
Well,
a possibility you'd have to admit, right?
I don't actually have as much of a problem with that possibility as with the presumption that Christians have figured out exactly how all those things went wrong, particularly when there's not been a lot of listening, in my observation, between Christians, Jews. There's not been a lot of listening by the Christians on understanding, because there's things like the Talmud, and some Christians who are a little less studied than yourself have actually gotten very mad at me for bringing up the Talmud, when interpretation, which is literally the history of rabbinical debates and interpretations and so forth. There is one question that actually, from a little while ago, I wanted to ask you, and I don't actually think you need to answer this. I just want to ask you because I want you to think about it. You can answer it or not, as you please. Hypothetically, okay? If Christianity was genuinely not true, would you want to know?
So, it's funny you say that because I was going to ask you the opposite question.
Oh, I already know my answers, yes.
If Christianity were true, would you be a Christian?
I would want to know.
That's not the question. If Christianity was true, again, this is a hypothetical thought experiment. But if Christianity were true, would you be a Christian?
I don't know that I could say yes to that. I would want to know if it were true.
And that's an honest answer. I appreciate
I would want to know if it were true. But which version of it was true and what the implications would affect my response to how I would act about it. So I can say initially, yes, I would want to know. What my response would be would very much depend on how the details played out in that conversation, because that would be broader.
I can be a little bit more specific. If Christianity were true, the last thing I would do is worship the God of the Bible, based on the Bible.
But see, that goes to what Lilith just said as far as the virgin. You have a misunderstanding of who the God of the Bible is, I think.
And if that is the case,
again,
if that is the case, then the one who takes the blame for that is the God of the Bible. Because then if I have a misunderstanding, then that misunderstanding comes from Scripture, which is supposed to be His word.
Well, and from Christians, there's been a great deal of Christian theology written over the last 2,000 years.
That one a little bit. If I say something and you hang on. If I say something and you misunderstand me, does the fault lie with me or does the fault lie with you?
Well, that depends. Are you omniscient?
Yes. You're not.
It doesn't enter. The interpreter, the receiver.
No.
Is the one that sets.
You misunderstand. Let me.
Let me clear this up because it's directed.
Then you would
wait a minute.
Know
wait a minute.
Better.
Let me clear this up because it's directed at me. God is supposed to be all powerful or maximum powerful, depending on the Christian you talk to, and He's supposed to be omniscient, and He's supposed to be omnibenevolent. Given those 3 attributes, that gives Him everything He needs to convince me, and that gives Him the power that everything He says, I will understand it the way He means it. Because if it's not the case, then He's not all-powerful, or He's not omnibenevolent. Those attributes
sound like Hume.
To the Epicurean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I was thinking the same thing. One thing. God. Yeah.
One thing I need to jump in. We're
thing going here.
We're an hour and 40 minutes in.
We're running out of time.
Yeah. I usually want to wrap these up around an hour and a half, and we've already gone over that. that being said, I really enjoyed the conversation. So I'm hoping that you will come back for another show. If you want to get a specific topic for a next show, that would be great. If you then would be willing to continue this conversation, we could do a third show. You can come back as many times as you want. I mean, I think we've had a really good conversation. We like it when our guests are not only cordial, but also seem sincere and respectful. You've been all of that, which I already concluded in the intake that we had, because we had a very nice chat during our intake, which is another.
Jealous of your car.
Yeah. Well, but this is the message that we want to give with our shows. We don't need to be enemies just based on our religious perspective. We have one world.
We can discuss it.
Yes, we have one world, and we need to share that one world. So we need to figure out a way to live with each other and reduce the amount of harm that is currently going on. And if conversations like this can contribute to that, then I'm all for that. Probably won't, because we're far too small a channel, but go ahead.
Just a quick experience that kind of impacted me and had an effect. Not that I agree with Islam, but I had the opportunity to spend some time with the Turkish Air Force. During that time, I got a chance to go to Constantinople and went through Hagia Sophia, went through the Wu Mosque, and the thought that struck me was, for all the good, or for all the harm that man does in the name of God, sometimes we get it right. Just looking at the beauty of those buildings as a praise to God. Now, whether you believe that the God of Islam is the same as the God of Christianity, that's a complete show or two. And I know you've interviewed some Muslims. But I think we take this perfect God, in my opinion, right, and from what I read in the Bible and from philosophy and moral arguments, I think a lot of times we take this perfect God, and I think this is where, and I'm kind of speaking in generalities here, this is where I think a lot of atheists kind of miss the boat, if you will. Instead of taking God for who he is and who he's revealed himself to be, I think a lot of times atheists will look at how people follow God. And I said it before, how people follow God as an example and a reflection of God himself. And it's really just not. It's, again, like I said, we are, in my opinion, everyone is fallen. There's no one that's perfect. Again, coming right out of Romans, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We all do wrong, and we can't get there ourselves. This whole idea of just fighting back and forth, because I also fully believe that God gave us free will. Some will accept, some will not. That's their free choice. It's not my place to condemn you for that choice, right? That is your choice as a independent human being, valuable human being. That is your choice to make. Obviously, I wish you would make a different choice, but that's your choice in the end.
I think that everyone should be free in deciding what they choose, or I can't say that they choose to believe, because you cannot choose to believe. You have to be convinced of it. I can't, and this is easy to test. If I would tell you that from now until the next time you and I talk on a live stream, you choose that you are a woman, you're probably not going to do that. That's not, because it's not possible for you, because you're not one. Right? that is not something that you can do by choice. So, and when it comes to
get you in a little trouble.
Yeah, well, I don't think so. But the things we believe, we cannot factually choose to believe them. We have to be convinced of them, and we can be convinced for good and for bad reasons. Another thing that I want to come back to is what you said. You visited Constantinople. I still want to visit Barcelona in Spain, which has by far the most beautiful church on the planet, which is the Sagrada Familia. And this is a two-edged sword, because they've been building that for several hundreds of years now, and it's still not finished, even though it is one of the most beautiful buildings on the planet. What would have happened if we put all that money into medical research and maybe try to get rid of cancer? So there are two things. We like our beauty, and obviously we can have that. I still think that with the money involved, there would have been better causes. And then, yeah, we wouldn't have the beauty, but that for me is a small loss.
I think beauty is not a small loss. I think it does have value. And I think you touched on, there's an appeal that religion taps into that is universal in human experience. And I don't, you see, Muslims also having beautiful architecture and beautiful religious history and all of that, along with some less beautiful points. But I respect that you're willing to listen to someone else's perspective and allow them to speak for themselves.
Yeah.
So
Me
I
too.
just want to say that.
Oh.
That is a very valuable and I would say indispensable point in even having this discussion. Because if we're not able to say what we ourselves think, we're kind of just, it's not a discussion. But I believe, as you pointed out, we're well over time, and it's been a very enjoyable discussion. I want to thank you for that, Dave. And please, watch anything with me involved. And if you decide to come back, I'd be delighted to answer any number of questions you can come up with. I'll as thoroughly as I can within reasonable time limits.
I don't know whether I will or not. Initial take, I probably will. But as I told Peter when we did our first talk, I'm not comfortable in front of a camera. I have a face for radio and a voice for writing.
Wait. Did you notice? Did you notice this? I mean,
I think you're a little hard on yourself there, Dave.
I mean, in all honesty, I think people would prefer looking at you than they would at me, because that's just the thing. So I wouldn't worry about that.
This is what I'm here for. This is why I need a better camera.
That's right. The rose between two thorns. There you go.
Okay, but I really want to wrap it up right now, because otherwise we're going too long, and if we keep it around an hour and a half, we just get more views. That's how the whole algorithm works. People don't have the stamina to go through a 2-hour show.
As you both are, I have a cold, so.
Okay. So, Dave,
they don't have 2 or 3 hours to just sit around and listen to a bunch of other people talk about things they're never going to agree on.
So, do you have any last words, Dave?
Yeah, I'll just go back to kind of what I originally said. I would just ask that both you and your viewers just consider the God of the Bible, consider the sacrifice that was made through His Son to allow us to reestablish that relationship with Him. I fully believe from life experience, that He's the only way. He is the only way that we have a pleasant forever eternity. So just, if they can, as much as they can, and I know there's a lot of people out there that have been hurt by the church, and I can't account for that. It is what it is. But just take an objective look and consider, because I can tell you from having been a Christian that fell away to being a Christian that came back, it's well worth it.
Okay. Yeah, I think you'll find that most of them already have, but yeah, I can't speak for other people. I also want to say
People should always consider ideas.
Yeah,
But
I also want to say it's not about being hurt, because if you're hurt, you're most likely to have been hurt by people and not by a deity. Because those are the stuff.
Is an argument we're not getting into. That'll be another 3 hours.
We don't
I
want
have had a cold for 3 weeks, Peter. I can't talk that long.
I can be really quick with that, because if you're going to be hurt by the deity, that means that the deity exists.
You beat me to my point.
Yeah,
See?
no, but that depends how you define it and what you decide to attribute to it, and then blah, 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 arguments forever.
We better just quit. Or...
Yeah.
Yes.
Quit while we're behind. So,
yes.
Again, Dave, thank you for coming on. I really like talking to you. You were a great guest as far as I'm concerned. Lilith, thank you for co-hosting, as always. Always a delight to have you on. For the people in chat, thank you all for coming. We didn't get all of the questions from the chat in, because sometimes they would have worked, but yeah, then we need to constantly interrupt the flow of the conversation. But thank you all for coming. Leave a comment if you want. There's a comment section right down here, and you can leave a comment. We'd love to see what you think about the show.
Can I say one last thing?
Sure.
For your viewers, if they are interested, sheepdogapologetics.org.
Oh, I forgot.
The website. I have a few writings on there. It's not real extensive, but if they're interested, go there, leave a comment, ask a question.
I will make sure. I will make sure. I forgot that. I will make sure, if you send me the links that you want to have put in the description, I will put those in the description so people can go and see and know where to find you. So I will put those in.
The only stipulation request I would make is don't try bother trolling, because I'm not going to answer them. If you have honest intellectual questions, I'm more than happy to address them.
And
fair enough.
And I
want to be respectful here. There's no reason we shouldn't be respectful on your page.
Yes,
thank you. That's
something that I would say as well. There's no reason to make hateful or spiteful comments. That's just not helping. It's better to have an interaction like we did than trolling or just being hateful or spiteful. So, with that said, I thank you all for watching, and we're still in the process of setting up a few more shows. It's difficult at times. With Dave, it was difficult. Dave took the day off to do this, which is really much appreciated. I mean, that's just awesome. Not everyone has that ability, though, so bear with us. We'll be back.
I'm very blessed with that.
We'll be back quite soon. And we'll leave you all with a brief word of our sponsor. Catch you all next time. Bye-bye.
Listen to this. Our visitors watched almost 18 million minutes of our videos on YouTube. I'm telling you, praise God. Can you imagine that? I want to say a big thank you to all of our YouTube subscribers and all of our partners. Now listen, if you have not subscribed to a YouTube channel, do it right now. Do it today. And all you have to do is click the big red subscribe button. Be sure to share our channel with your family and with friends, because it takes all of us working together to spread the word